faith story of my sister Cindy isn't really about her. She only lived for 7 years. She was killed the same night my mother was when I was 5. The joys of growing up together, laughing and playing in the backyard, working through life's problems with each other, are joys that never happened. But her life touched me in a very deep way. Her faith story is really about those of us that were left behind. For more than 42 years, we have struggled to understand and deal with the fact that we have been forced to go through this test of our faith that we didn't request. None of us has been able to deal with this perfectly, and each one of us has repercussions, hang-ups, and scars that we really wish we didn't have. Through the years, as we all go through this in our individual ways, the ones that probably struggle the most are my grandparents. Their way of coping is based on denial and not talking about it. In many ways, that has not made it easier, but in fact has made it harder for all of us. Despite this, my grandparents did one very important thing right. They stayed connected to God. They got through the ups and downs of life the best they could, and in the midst of this, they never let go of God. Their faithfulness to each other, 70 years of marriage, and faithfulness to God are the legacies they are leaving to me and my family. They have shown us how to stay attached to the vine even during very dark periods of life, especially when it seems those dark periods will never end. And it is this legacy that turns out to be the faith story of my sister Cindy.
By now you're probably realizing there's a lot of variety in these stories, and they're not all the same. It's because people are never the same, and the circumstances of each of our lives, they're not the same. You know, some people leave this earth peacefully in their sleep after what we would consider a full life. Others leave early. Some leave real early. Some obviously suffer some sort of a lingering illness that eventually kills them, and others at least appear to have a pretty peaceful life. One of the things I think that as we listen to these stories that we're all going to realize is some of these people that we thought had such peaceful, kind of rosy lives, it wasn't all that way. I think what we find is that nobody stays attached to the vine because there was never, ever anything that caused them to maybe doubt the vine or to consider pulling away. No, they stayed attached to the vine because of faithfulness to Jesus Christ and a decision to remain faithful. You know, despite the differences that we may have, there's one thing that we all share in common, and that is dependence on the vine.
Roy and Eula never stopped planting seeds for a garden and seeds for the kingdom. As they grow older, I asked why not slow down. Their reasoning was God would take them home when it was time to stop. As long as they were able to grow vegetables to cook, so they could invite people to come to their home for Sunday lunch. Whatever they had, they shared. Their home, their food, their love, their hope. They never wavered in their faithfulness to God. When their health began to fail, their faith grew stronger. God would work this out to His glory, and He did. In their last years, they were physically inactive, but active prayer warriors on behalf of family, friends, the lost, or anyone they knew who needed God's mercies. Looking forward to an eternity with God, they faced death unafraid. I long to see you, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. Romans 1:11 and 12. These words of the Apostle Paul to the Roman Christians express my feelings as I think about my sister who has been with the Lord for nearly 3 years now. Marge was 2.5 years older than me, and once we got past the sibling rivalry of our teen years, we became best friends. For 50 years I was privileged to share with her the joy of her faith in God. That faith that was planted in our home, was nurtured by our church family, was tested repeatedly by the challenges of life, and continued to grow throughout her days. Marge knew well both grief and the peace-giving embrace of God's Holy Spirit. When she was 30 years old, our father had a fatal heart attack. 2 years later, Mom succumbed to breast cancer. The year after that, Marge rushed to Abilene to be with Alan and me when my first wife, Carolyn, who was Alan's mother, our sister Penny, and my daughter Cindy were all crushed by 2 drag racing drunks. 6 years later, she flew to be with her eldest son, a missionary in Belgium, after his 2-year-old son, her first grandchild, had fallen into a cistern and drowned. Less than a year after that, she drove to be with us when Karen's sister Debbie was taken by a brain tumor. Meanwhile, during these same years, her husband's mother, father, and 2 sisters had also died. Through all of these battering storms of life, Marge calmly dealt with her own grief by taking it to God and remained a rock-solid, comforting, faithful support for those of us around her. I remember her sitting by my side after the triple funeral in Abilene while people came by and offered us their condolences. One couple, who had known our sister Penny when she had worked with the church in Paris for 2 years, stopped and said, "Poor Penny. She was so looking forward to completing her university education, getting married, and having a family. I feel so sad for her." After they left, I remember Marge turning to me and saying with a bit of a smile, "Poor Penny? She's in the presence of God. Poor us." By the time she was 65, Marge had needed an arthritic hip replaced, had developed diabetes, and an accompanying diabetic heart with so many arteries plugged up that nothing could be done. The next year she lost consciousness and collapsed when her heart stopped. Her husband found her and performed CPR on her for several minutes until the emergency medical team arrived. The doctors did not expect her to live, but after a couple of days she began to regain consciousness and was out of the hospital and back to normal in about a week. She lived another 7 years before her continuously weakening heart finally stopped for good. Throughout the pain of all that heartbreak and suffering, Marge's trust in God never wavered. She was happy, and she continuously shared her joyful faith with her husband, her 6 children, and the rest of us in the family, along with countless friends. Though Marge and I were often separated by half a continent or more, I cherished our extended telephone conversations that always gravitated toward spiritual discussions and the sharing of our common faith in God. She was the resident family counselor, and via countless prayers and chats, she urged her children, the rest of our family, and her many friends to bring their problems to God and to experience the joy and peace of faith in God. Her last 7 years following her near-death experience were some of her most fruitful. She often said that God must have given her those 7 years because He still had something for her to do. I think she was right. It has been 3 years now since she flew her cage, and though I still miss her immeasurably, I don't for 1 second begrudge her the joy with which I know she is filled as she sings with the heavenly chorus praising God. Though she never met most of you, here is the message I know she would send you. This is the love for God, to obey His commands, and His commands are not burdensome, for everyone born of God overcomes the world. This is the victory that has overcome the world, even our faith. 1 John 5:3-4.